Far off in the distance, the three adventurers could see clear lines of small figures marching at quite a speed. Row upon row of red ants, some 500 or so at a best guess, heading up a steep hill towards Borgor's apple house, pulling behind them their potato gun cannon. "You'll have to let us in, sir," said Farmer Peters. He thought the use of the word sir may help to pacify the miserable worm. Borgor himself looked at the attacking army before grunting back, "The answer is still no. The sign says go away, so away you must go." "Why, you stubborn—" With that, Lani lashed out with her fast paws and clenched Borgor by the head and started to pull him out from his hole. "If they get us, then they are going to get you too." "Lani, leave him be," Farmer Peters spoke up in a rather commanding voice. "Violence will not get us anywhere. We need the help of this fine fellow." "Do we?" said Lani, with the wriggling Borgor clenched tightly within her grip. "I thought we could rely on Spud, what with him being the chosen one." With that, Borgor looked up quickly, gazing over at Spud. "The chosen one?" He wriggled free from Lani's grasp and popped fully out of his hole by his own accord. "The chosen one is here?"
"I am,"
muttered Spud, in a somewhat embarrassed voice, still seemingly a bit bemused at all this talk of being special.
"I am the one that you spoke of in your learned words."
"Well, that changes everything,"
Borgor said, releasing the door to the apple house.
"With that, we must protect the chosen one. Inside, everyone, and quickly. These ants can move at quite a pace."
Farmer Peters, Lani and Spud followed Borgor inside the building. The worm closed the door and locked it with a huge padlock. He then added a further padlock, followed by 2 more padlocks, before pushing a large bookcase in front of the door for extra protection.
"There! That should do it,"
he gasped, before adding a further 2 padlocks for good measure. The sound of marching grew louder and louder outside, echoing around the huge chasms of the Underworld. Farmer Peters looked around, very nervously, as he had never been in quite this much trouble before in all his years. "So, what are we to do now?" he said. "Do we just wait here for them to arrive and take us?" Borgor looked up, and a faint smile appeared on what was a rather sad-looking face.
"The protection of my home gives us time to think. Nothing more."
For the inside of an apple, the house was in fact very grand. On the floor lay a brown carpet that gave the impression of soil, whilst against each wall there were tall bookcases, each of which were full to the brim with leather-bound books. In the centre of the room there was a single bed with a desk beside it, covered in papers.
"Make yourself comfortable,"
Borgor uttered solemnly,
"and start thinking."
Farmer Peters scratched his head. "Can we not call on the help of the other worms? Any assistance would be gratefully received. I don't much like the odds of 4 against 500. Borgor's face grew ever more sorrowful.
"Oh, if only that was the case. The other worms have long gone. At the first sign of trouble, they burrowed their way back up to the world above the soil. I tried to warn them that the dangers are probably even greater up there. The gulls and other birds have always tried to capture and eat us, but with our new size, each and every one would be a veritable feast. Alas, I fear that they have all probably been gobbled up, or at least they have not returned."
Lani, who had at first taken immediate dislike to the worm, softened at this story. "You must be frightfully lonely."
"Oh, I am! I am!"
Borgor broke into tears, sobbing.
"I once thought that all I needed was my books, but now I've realised that they are not company enough. If just one other worm was to return, it would be enough."
He sobbed some more, the water pouring from his eyes. With no hands of his own to wipe the tears away, he looked quite a sorrowful state. All the while this discussion was going on, Spud was peering through the hole in the apple, watching as the red ants grew closer. so close now, indeed, that he could even make out the expressions on their faces. He was desperately trying to think of a plan of escape, but was finding it very difficult to concentrate with Borgor's loud crying behind him. Outside, the marching ground to a halt, and the tallest of the ants made his way to the front. He cleared his throat before shouting, "Enemies of the Red Ants world, give yourself up! You have until the count of 10 before we fire!" With that, there was a loud bang as the gun fired a missile made from potato flesh towards the apple house, thankfully missing by some distance. The leader ant turned around angrily. "Right! Who did that? I hadn't given the order yet." "Sorry," came a voice from the back. What can be best described as a very dim-witted sounding voice. "I thought you said fire." "No, no, no," shouted the leader. "I said that I will count to 10 and then you can fire." As he shouted the word fire, a second missile exploded from out of the cannon. Again misfired, and this time launched only just above the heads of the ant army. So low indeed that the leader had to duck and then dive to the ground as it only narrowly missed him. "You cretin! You fool!" shouted the leader. "We are meant to be using this to wipe out the black ants, not our own armies." "Sorry," came the voice again from the back. "Just leave it alone," called out the leader. "Don't touch it again." In all this commotion, Spud had jumped out of the hole in the apple and stood upon the roof, grasping the stalk. Although most definitely frightened by the huge army that stood before him, he could not help but chuckle.
I believe it is me that you are after,"
he called out quite bravely.
"I am Spud, 34,527. I am the one that was spoken of in the prophecy."
There was a loud gasp from the ants. The leader got himself back upon his feet and dusted himself off. "Red Ant Army! Attack!" he shouted and pointed at Spud. There was a loud cry and the first row of the army surged forwards. Spud leapt to the very edge of the rooftop.
"Go on then, come and get me,"
he shouted triumphantly. The ants rammed their bodies against the side of the apple house, which shook violently, but the potato kept his balance and stood firm.
"You'll have to do better than that,"
Spud yelled, and hopped across to the opposite side of the roof. "Imbeciles!" shouted the leader of the ants, while slapping his own forehead in frustration. "Second row! Attack!" he screamed. With that, the next row of the army gave out a deafening roar and rushed towards the apple. They rammed the side of the building that Spud was now standing on, which again caused an almighty shake.
"There are 500 of you, and only one of me,"
Spud called out cheekily.
"But you still can't get me."
He leapt back to his original standing spot. The first row rammed the building again, even more ferociously than they did the first time. Spud jumped back across to the other side, just in time for the next charge by the second row of the ant army. After each attack, he leapt from side to side, and the apple started to shake rhythmically. "Oh my!" gasped Farmer Peters, covering his eyes. "With all this force, they will pulp us." He was quite right. The shaking was causing all of the bookshelves to rock, and the pages already lay strewn across the floor. Outside, the Red Ant's leader was growing increasingly impatient. "Get me that potato now, or you will all be court-martialed!" At this, the ants charged against the walls of the apple with increasing force, while Spud leapt across the roof faster and faster. The apple rocked from side to side, and then suddenly, following a particularly heavy battering from the second row of ants, it started to roll. Spud was catapulted up into the air and just, and I mean only just, managed to grasp hold of the stalk as the fruit began to roll down the steep hill from which the ant armies had come. Faster and faster it sped, and the ant armies fled in panic, screaming in fear that they would be crushed. "Cowards!" shouted the leader. "I command you to attack!" But it was no good. His armies had completely dispersed, and in any event, the apple had sped off far into the distance. Inside the house, There was complete pandemonium, as the contents were catapulted around the building as it rolled down the hill, as were Farmer Peters, Lani and Borgor. "Oh no! I must save Spud!" screamed Farmer Peters, as books and furniture bounced against his body. He tried desperately to reach towards the hole, but before he could get to it, there was a loud thumping crash as the apple collided with a large rock, the jagged edge of which burst through the wall, causing the fruit to implode. Farmer Peters looked around him, searching for his friends amongst all the destruction. Phew! Lani was quite safe, albeit looking somewhat dazed and confused. Spud too, quite amazingly, was unharmed, and still holding tightly to the stalk. "Well done, Spud," Farmer Peters cheered. "You saved us." Spud smiled.
Maybe I am special one after all,
He said proudly.
We've made quite a mess of poor Borgor's house, though. Hopefully he will still be happy to reveal my destiny to me.
It was then that they noticed Borgor. The worm's body lay lifeless before them, crushed by his own bookshelves. His eyes were closed, and he made no sound.